Well, thank you very much indeed for that welcome, and thank you everyone for coming this morning. I know it has been a full-on conference, and I hope everyone's having fun, finding it interesting. I'd like to begin, obviously, by thanking Victoria and Paul and the army of Contact in the Desert volunteers, all the people doing the AV, the admin, everything, without whom this fabulous event couldn't take place. So thanks to them, and thanks to you all for coming. I don't know how many of you have been to Contact in the Desert before, or how many of you are newbies, but I have been going as a speaker pretty much for as long as the event has run. And of course, I started off when they had their home at the Joshua Tree Retreat Center, an amazing location. I loved it, full of character. Sadly, the conference outgrew the venue. There were hundreds more people wanted to come than could be accommodated. So they are now in this new home, and I think, obviously, if they had to move anywhere, this is a great place to be. And as I said yesterday, I'm not just saying that. For those of you who don't know, although I'm a Brit, I've actually lived in the United States for a number of years now. I moved over in January 2012. We split our time between San Jose, where my wife is a professor at the university, but our main residence is Tucson, Arizona. So when I say I like the desert, I'm not kidding you. We live in the desert. We have 3.5 acres, and really the only difference between the view from our place and the view from the hotel window here is that we have saguaro cacti and not palm trees, but the temperature is about the same. In fact, I'm probably one of the few people who comes here and I say, it's a little bit cooler here than it is back home. So, but I know there are a lot of people from Canada and who've come down from like Illinois and Minnesota and the Dakotas and things, so I guess it's pretty warm for you people. Anyway, I am going to make this a proper workshop. So this is not going to be me just talking at you for 2 hours. I'd like to make it more interactive. I'd like to make it almost like a conversation. Certainly I'm going to do Q&A at the end, but I would actively encourage you, and I'm not just saying this, if you hear something you disagree with, shout out. If you have a question, throw it into the mix. Be disruptive, be subversive. You know, it's a small, intimate group. It's a Sunday morning. We can have a little fun with this. I think, I have heard some amazing presentations, but I think what I have learned, particularly from some of the panels that I've been on, is when you all have a chance to chip in and share your thoughts and your experiences and such like, people appreciate that, I think, even more. I was on the government disclosure panel yesterday, and Steve Bassett basically went straight to questions so that the audience had a chance to say, well, this is what's on my mind. And I'd like to make this workshop the same. The other reason is I very much doubt this is going to be 2 hours worth of material, so I would actively encourage us to be interactive and also to go off topic. I mean, if you know, for example, if you've just seen me on Ancient Aliens say something and you think, well, that's not really aliens and religion, doesn't matter. Shout it out. Say, hey, Nick, what about Rendlesham Forest? Or hey, Nick, what's going on with the British government declassifying and releasing these files? So let's be interactive like that. And I haven't got a prize for the first person that shouts anything out, but you will get the kudos of being the person who who kind of kick-started the conversation. For those of you that don't know, just to say a little bit more about my background, I worked for the Ministry of Defence in the UK for 21 years. The Ministry of Defence is the equivalent of your DoD here, so it is both a policy-making Department of State with the Defence Secretary at the helm, but it's also the UK's highest level military headquarters. I was a civilian employee, but we were a whole bunch of different people, civilians, military police, intelligence people, all in the same building, kind of working for the common aim of the MOD. And as I say, I did 21 years there. They moved you around every 3 or 4 years. You move either on promotion or level transfer. I did about 7 or 8 different jobs in that time period, including 2 secondments into the Air Force operations room in the Joint Operations Center during the first Gulf War, the Persian Gulf War, and then in the Kosovo War. So I'd done a number of different things, and in January of 1991, just as the land war in the Persian Gulf War started, I was in the Air Force ops room. I was working to a particular manager, and he said, after everyone goes back to their normal jobs, I have a vacancy coming up, and I understand that you're due for a move. And I said, that's correct, yes. What's the job? And he said, UFOs. And I said, excuse me? And he said, yeah, I'd like you to come and do that particular job. And I was like, okay. I knew that the Ministry of Defense had that post because one of the things that every Ministry of Defense employee had was the telephone directory. The telephone directory was literally that thick. It was itself a classified document because it had some information about everyone's job titles. So it would have things like, radar and imagery analysis, Soviet desk, or intelligence gathering on China tank capabilities, whatever it might be. And leafing through this directory when I joined in 1985, like all new recruits, I was like, well, I wonder what interesting jobs there are that I might get. And by chance, I just turned one page under the Division Secretariat Air Staff, and it just said UFOs. And that's all it said. Even in this classified telephone directory with the detailed job descriptions, everyone else had lots of details. You're dealing with briefings for the Secretary of State and other defense ministers going to Air Force bases, or you're dealing with updating the NATO war books and the war plans, and you're dealing with the political and other aspects of military aircraft accidents. UFOs. That's all it said. I was like, okay. I said yes. I mean, I had, I think, done a good job on this secondment. I was seconded down there because you needed to have had briefing experience, and you needed to have a exceptionally high security clearance, top secret SCI, sensitive compartmentalized information. You were dealing with real-time information about the military campaign to kick Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. And it was literally, you would get flash signal traffic in, Scud launch detected, estimated target, interception, whatever. So it was pretty scary stuff. And as I say, I think I had done a fairly good job of impressing that manager. We did 12 hours on, 12 hours off for a week. Then we stood down, got a bit of rest, and then we came back and we did 12 hours on, 12 off, but the other way, so you would go on to the night shift if you'd done days and things like that. It was, gosh, I could give a whole presentation about all the other things I've done in the Ministry of Defense that have nothing to do with UFOs, but I'll leave that for another day. I retired, by the way. I left in 2006. My final. I'm just doing this to give you a bit of flavor and color before we get into the religious stuff. But my final posting was to the Directorate of Defense Security, and I retired as a acting deputy director there with responsibility for military policing issues. And I got to go out to places like Kosovo and Iraq, or as we say in the UK, Kosovo and Iraq. Forgive the pronunciation. But, and that was quite interesting. As a civvy, you can't be sent out to Iraq. You have to volunteer to go out to Iraq. And they said, oh, don't worry. You know, whenever you go out there, if you're going anywhere off base, you'll be in an armored military convoy. And I'm like, okay, that sounds good. So I'm there one day at Basra Air Base, and we have to go to one of Saddam Hussein's old palaces in downtown Basra, or wherever it was. And some guys turn up and they say, you know, Mr. Pope, yeah, who are you guys? And they're like, we're your armored convoy. And I look and I see a couple of Land Rovers, and I'm like, where's the rest of you? Like, where are those Warrior armored personnel carriers and those Challenger 2 main battle tanks and things like that? And it's like, no, this is it. I'm like, okay. But no, they were really good. The force protection people were really, really good. So anyway, I just to take it back, I said, yeah, I'll take that UFO job. And I was a little bit nervous about it because I think, like most people in the Ministry of Defense, I wanted, I was in the junior managerial grade at the time, and I wanted the posts that the high flyers got. And the high flyers always tried to go for the job in the private office of the Secretary of State for Defense or the Minister of State for the Armed Forces. And you always wanted to be an APS, an Assistant Private Secretary. And that you wouldn't have much more responsibility than running the minister's diary or dealing with the parliamentary liaison. But the fact that you were in that kind of post meant that you could pretty much pick your next job, which was almost certainly going to be on promotion. So the real high flyers got those jobs. And sadly, I never got that job. But, you know, I got the UFO job. But what the heck? It changed my life forever, opened my mind and my eyes to all sorts of fantastic new information and possibilities. So I'm glad that I got that and not running the visit program for the defense secretary or whatever. So let's kick into aliens and religion. Where is my thing? Okay, that picture, by the way, is of me 10 years ago. I think there should be a prize given to the speaker that gets away with using the oldest publicity picture. You know, it takes a little bit of chutzpah, doesn't it? I mean, okay, that was taken in about 2004, 2005, so I'm pushing it a bit. That's what, 12, 13, 14 years ago that picture was taken. My goodness, I'm not the worst offender. Some people, you'd think they were about 12 looking at their promo shots. I'm naming no names. But it's like, hey, that's not you. That's you 20 years ago. My hair has got a little lighter since then. Thank you, and thank you for being the first one to interject. You get the prize, which is, as I say, just the kudos. But thank you. That's me in front of the Jodrell Bank radio telescope near Manchester in England. And for those that don't know, something very interesting is happening at Jodrell Bank. And forgive me for going completely off topic, but what the hell? It's a small, intimate audience, and I can do what I like. So, as can you. The square kilometer array radio telescope is going to be the largest and most powerful radio telescope ever constructed. It's going to be spread over different locations, even South Africa, Australia. If there are other civilizations out there, certainly in our corner of the galaxy, the SKA may well be the thing that finds them. And you know, a lot of people say, well, you know, why use radio astronomy to look for aliens out there when they're coming down here? Well, if they're coming down here, but the government isn't telling you, don't we want a way that we can just switch on a piece of scientific equipment and everyone will know, hey, there are other civilizations out there. And the square kilometer array might just be the thing that will do it. And the headquarters is going to be at Jodrell Bank in the UK. And construction is going to begin next year. They have a website, just Google square kilometer array. Construction will not, this is such a major engineering project, and the tech is so new, so powerful, so sophisticated, that construction probably won't be completed till 2029 or 2030, but it should, if all goes to plan, and yes, they still need funding for this, it's an international collaboration, but few things could be more impactful than finding definitive proof for everyone, not just the elite, that we're not alone in the universe, that I think this will get funded. Someone like Yuri Milner or Elon Musk or Paul Allen, who's already funded part of the SETI program, for example, someone like that will chip in, and because it's going to be the ultimate game-changing revelation, the person that makes that discovery and is behind it and actually announces it in a verifiable way for everyone to know, that person is going to write their name in the history books. And whoever that is, you know, it's high stakes. And the square kilometer array is worth following, I think, as something to keep your eye on as it develops. As is another mission that's underway at the moment. And for those of you I'm not really into all this symbolism stuff. It's not my field of expertise. But for those of you who appreciate symbolism and the idea that the powerful, the elite, the Illuminati kind of occasionally play little jokes, word games, symbolism, imagery, there's a mission underway at the moment called Osiris Rex. And again, you can Google that. But Osiris Rex is basically, it launched a couple of years ago, and it's one of these missions to land a probe on an asteroid, to take a sample and to bring it back to Earth. So the R in Osiris, I think, stands for return. The I stands for the O, pardon me, stands for origins. So what they are telling you is that this is about human origins, potentially. And they're going to bring back this sample, and as I say, the mission is called Osiris Rex. Osiris is our king, maybe someone is saying. Osiris is our god. So again, Google square kilometer array, have a look at that. Google Osiris Rex, and take a look at some of that. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening right now. Okay, a warning for you. You cannot get into any discussion. I mean, it's like, what is the old country song? Politics, religion, and her. You know, it's like, you cannot get into any discussion about religion without offending someone. You know, Christian, Muslim, Mormon, Jew, Hindu, Sikh, pagan, agnostic, atheist, you know, whatever you are, whoever you are, Church of the Spaghetti Monster. I think that is a thing. Right, yeah, Pastafarian. But yes.
Okay, so I watch a lot of aliens. I've seen you on there a lot. I know you have a vast amount of knowledge, especially from your ministry and position. Are some of these things are you allowed to speak about some of the items you talk about? How does that work? Is there things that you can't say?
Yes. Good Good question. I signed my secrecy oath on my first day in government service, which is, I think, May 8th, 1985, something like that. It's called the Official Secrets Act, and it's almost a piece of catch-all legislation which says you really can't discuss anything. And then on my last day of government service, I signed a reminder form reminding me that the Official Secrets Act binds me for life. The only reason that I can come out and talk about these sorts of things is that the British government is itself in the process of declassifying and releasing its UFO files. I'm not a whistleblower. I am talking, I hope, as someone who can give a bit of an insider perspective on material that the British government is itself releasing and declassifying. But if they haven't declassified it, I'm not going to discuss it. I know where the line is, and I'm not going to cross it. This is where I probably disagree with people like Danny Sheehan and some of the other people. I don't actually support whistleblowing. I don't. I'll tell you why. Most times when you get a whistleblower, that person is not the information owner or the information holder. In government, in the world of information security, there is a subject matter expert, your SME, and your information owner. And then there's the information holder, which is basically, as it says on the label, it's just whoever has that information. Most times when you get a whistleblower, what you have is somebody who has access to that information, but they're not necessarily the subject matter expert. They are not the information owner. So they see something and they think, hey, the American people need to know about this. And then they kind of leak it. And I'm talking about the sort of people like Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden, and in the UK, David Shayler, Richard Tomlinson. Those people are real whistleblowers. And I'm going to say something else about real whistleblowers and fake whistleblowers in a minute, which is going to be a little bit controversial. So bear with me. But unless you are the subject matter expert, you can't do the damage assessment. When government declassifies and releases information, it does a damage assessment. And it says, what would be the adverse consequences of releasing this information? The good consequences are open government, freedom of information, people's right as taxpayers and as people who hold, hopefully, their elected leaders to account. The good side of this is that it brings what we've funded. I mean, we've paid for everything. When government does something, we've paid for it. You know, every time you watch the news and you see about some big project and you think, gosh, I wonder who's going to pay for that. Well, the answer is we pay for it. We the people. But the adverse side of that is that when you release something to the American people, you don't just release it. Once it's out, it's out. You can't get the genie back into the bottle. And everything that goes onto the internet and gets leaked by whistleblowers doesn't just go to the American people with their right to know. It goes to the Russians. It goes to the Chinese. It goes to the Iranians, the North Koreans. It goes to ISIS. It goes to all sorts of... It goes to anyone and everyone. So that's why I say, yes, there is a place for whistleblowing in any free, open, democratic society, and there's a process for people in the system that see something they think is unconstitutional, illegal, immoral, unethical, whatever it is. There's a process for those people to take it up with people in the system but independent from the chain of command. And generally, those people are pretty good. But I do not support people saying, oh, hell, I'll just put it on the internet. I've seen stuff on WikiLeaks which could get people killed by disclosing things like methods and sources of gathering intelligence, strategy, tactics, doctrine for military operating in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. So I think, you know, I don't have much sympathy for the whistleblowers who put that information out there and then some young kid who's out on a tour of duty in Iraq kind of gets, Afghanistan or wherever, gets killed because one of the bad guys has read something about how we do our military convoys in Afghanistan. So, a lot of people here support whistleblowing, and okay, feel free to disagree with me on this, but I'm just saying that there is a flip side to it. So to answer your question, I know where the line is. I don't cross the line. I don't divulge classified information, and I'm only talking about this because the government is itself declassifying and releasing a lot of this material. And you can go to the MOD website, the National Archives website in the UK. We told Parliament, the media, and the public that the UFO topic was of limited interest and no defense significance. Well, guess what? So far, it's been a 10-year program to get all this declassified, and around 60,000 pages of documents, some of which were formerly classified secret UK eyes only, have now been put out there on the internet. Some of it blacked out, but 60,000 pages. Not bad for a subject which we told people was of very little interest. I said I was going to say something controversial about whistleblowers, real whistleblowers versus fake whistleblowers. There are a lot of people in this subject who say things like, I worked at Area 51, I was in a secret underground base, I've worked with the aliens, I've teleported to Mars with President Obama, I've been on the Mars colony, I've been on the secret space program. Well, in intelligence analysis, there's an old saying, there's an old joke that when you get an assessment, 99 times out of 100, you're only, as an intelligence person, getting this, you write, interesting if true. And I listen to a lot of people in this field, underground bases, autopsies, secret space programs, teleportation to Mars, colonies on the moon, and I just say, interesting if true. Trust but verify. And ask yourselves this: what happens to a real whistleblower? What happens when somebody leaks genuinely classified information? I mean, someone like Snowden or Manning. I'll tell you what happens. The full resources of the criminal justice system come down on that person to try and hunt them down, get them into a court, maybe put them in jail after due process if there's a guilty verdict. Every time genuine classified information is leaked, that's what happens. The state goes after them. So when you get these people saying, I worked on secret space programs and Mars colonies and teleportation and alien autopsies, if any of that's true, why aren't they going after those people? Might the answer be because it's not true? Because some of them, sad to say, are just making it up. So, trust but verify. Everything that I'm telling you, I'm trying to give references as I go along and say, check it out for yourselves. You can phone up the Ministry of Defense press office and say, hey, did you have this, maverick guy called Nick Pope doing your UFO job? And they'll say, yes, we did. And it's out there, on the website of British Parliament and stuff like that. Let's get into some religious stuff. Yes?
Could I just ask you that 60,000 pages, do you think the UK has released more about this subject than the United States?
Well, the United States has, to be fair. There's sometimes there's a slight irritation to me that people say Britain has disclosed, France has disclosed, Norway has disclosed, Brazil, New Zealand. When is America going to do it? When's the United States going to do it? Well, the US has, to be fair, already released a vast amount of information. It's quite old, Project Blue Book archive, but, and there's a lot of aircraft lights and weather balloons and misidentifications of the planet Venus, but there is some really good stuff in the Project Blue Book archive. So the US has disclosed some information, but of course, just recently in the last literally few months, there has of course been a game-changing revelation about what's been going on in the US. I'm talking, of course, about ATIP, the Pentagon's UFO project. For years, the US government told Congress and the media and the public, okay, we had this thing called Project Blue Book, we've released the archive, but there's no current interest in UFOs, and nobody within the US government is currently investigating this. Wrong. New York Times, December 16th, 2017, ran front page story saying the Pentagon did indeed have this program, ATIP, variously described as either Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program or Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program. We're not even 100% sure of the name. Luis Elizondo has said it's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. The Pentagon spokesperson, because of course the New York Times had to fact check this, they said it's aviation. But of course the fact that a Pentagon spokesperson acknowledged that the Times had this story right is a game changer. And that's why this subject is now out of the fringe into the mainstream, being discussed in the Times, the Post, CNN, Fox, NBC, ABC, whatever floats your boat. It's now out there. So, I think this is good news. People, maybe last year at Contact in the Desert, if you went back to your friends, your family, your place of work, and they said, hey, what did you do over the weekend? And you said, I went to a UFO conference. They probably said, hey, you don't believe that kind of nonsense, do you? You regarded maybe as the wacky people. Well, now it turns out, courtesy of the New York Times and the Washington Post, you are simply the people who were right. So well done. You're the people who were right about this. The government really was investigating this. There were cases in the files, Navy jets. You've seen the videos, I'm sure. Navy F-18 Super Hornets chasing something, trying to lock on with their radar. We've seen it. We've had some of the people involved with the program, like Luis Elizondo, speaking out about it quite openly. He hasn't been arrested yet. He knows where the line is. No, he's a good guy. He knows where the line is, and he's not crossing it either. He takes his security oath seriously, as do I. He's said that his aim, now he's out of government, is to kickstart a conversation with the American people about this. He wants to have a conversation about this. Let's not anymore say UFOs, oh, that's just crazy stuff. No. It's stuff that involved the Navy, the intelligence community, the government, the Pentagon, DIA, CIA, whoever it is. And to go back to your question about archives and release, the next phase of this is going to be the challenge to see, well, okay, the Pentagon confirmed to the New York Times in running that story that, yes, there was a program. So let's now try and get the documents that they have. So far, we've not seen much. We've seen 3 videos. We've seen a couple of technical reports that were written maybe by a contractor, maybe by someone at the Pentagon. We don't know 100% sure. But if ATIP was a thing, and by the way, the latest news about ATIP is that even that might not be the name. It may be ORSAP, Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program. And notice, by the way, the T, if it's ATIP, the T stands for threat. And there's a reason for that. Government views UFOs like it views anything else in terms of what is the threat and what is the opportunity. Is this good news or is this bad news? I would love to believe that any extraterrestrials that we might interact with, I would love to believe that they are benign and that they're going to welcome us into the Galactic Federation, if there is such a thing, and share their scientific and technical knowledge with us and usher us into a new age. I would love to believe that. But it might not be true. As above, so below. We look at people on Earth. There are good people, there are bad people. There are altruistic people, and there are selfish, evil people. And I suspect we will find, as we take our first steps out into the wider universe, that, as I say, as above, so below. There's probably a whole... Look, there's not just going to be... People say, what are the aliens like? And I'm like, what do you mean, the aliens? You think there's just one other civilization out there? If we're not alone in the universe, the chances of there being just two civilizations are as staggeringly small as the chance of there being just one, i.e. us. So if we find aliens, it's not just going to be one other planet orbiting one other star. And thus, we may find good aliens, bad aliens, aliens with a technological level less advanced than us, and aliens with a technology way ahead of us. We can get into some of that later, and I covered some of that in my lecture yesterday. Alien tech is an interesting thing. But just to round off that point about disclosure of documents, there are, I understand from various journalists and researchers, there are currently, I think, over 3,000 FOI requests in the system relating to ATIP. And some of them have come back no records. That may be because the name's wrong. As I say, maybe it's ORSAP and not ATIP. And maybe they're targeting the wrong agency. Some of the responses suggest that substantive replies to Freedom of Information Act requests about ATIP may not be made until 2019 or 2020. The government is struggling with this one, I tell you. They're in a fix. They were not happy when news of this came out. So we've had the Project Blue Book archive, and I recommend that to you. It's quite old, but there are some great cases in there. But watch out for the ATIP document dump when that comes. That kind of almost flows from what I was saying about it being likely that we share this universe with other civilizations, and probably a vast number of them. I mean, astronomers can't really agree on how many stars there are, even in our one galaxy. Estimates range between 100 billion and 400 billion. I mean, just vast, vast amounts. And the number of other galaxies, and you figure that each galaxy is hundreds of billions of stars, and then there are hundreds of billions of galaxies in the universe. I mean, as Douglas Adams wrote in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, space is big. And in relation to religion, they had this kind of ties in the idea, is there or is there not anything special and unique about Earth? Is Earth the center of the universe, created by a god? Or is it just a fairly ordinary planet orbiting a fairly ordinary sun, and actually there's nothing special about us at all? And this kind of one world or many worlds debate has been going on in philosophy and religion for hundreds and hundreds of years, and the kind of Aristotle mode of the view of Earth as center of the cosmos, and then the old idea that the Earth was it, and everything else revolved around the Earth. And of course, people were burnt at the stake sometimes for suggesting otherwise. And then the science came in, and religions have to adapt and evolve in the light of this. And we can get into, and we'll be getting into, the whole conflict between science and religion and things. But even within religions, there has been a debate about this for some time, and some religious people certainly said that they didn't have a doctrinal problem with ideas. And you know, you can go, I think in the Quran, for example, there's a reference to many worlds and seventh heaven and things like that, and all sorts of things in the Bible, which we can get into later as well. So some religions have these, almost these hints, if you can call them that, in the texts about the many worlds scenario. So there doesn't seem to be any fundamental religious objection to the idea that there might be many worlds and other life. And perhaps it was José Gabriel Funes who said it best and most recently in May 2008. And Funes was the previous director of the Vatican's observatory. Yes, they have one. It's part of religion's attempt not to recreate what happened in the Middle Ages, and to try and get more alongside the scientific community and incorporate science into religion. In May 2008, José Gabriel Funes gave an interview, and he made this quote. And I don't often read my slides, but I think I will just read this onto the record. "This is not in contradiction with our faith, because we cannot establish limits to God's creative freedom." In other words, you know, humans may not say, "Oh no, you know, God wouldn't have done that," or "God couldn't do this." If there is a creator, Funes was saying, that creator can create what he, she, it, you know, wants. And that's I think one of the best encapsulations of the Catholic Church's current thinking on this. And Funes, on such an impactful topic, knowing full well that quote would send shockwaves through both the religious and the scientific community, there is simply no way that he would have given that quote, expressed that opinion, without getting top cover, not from God, top cover from the Pope. So even though the Pope didn't say that, I think it is a reasonably good assumption that, look, no senior high-profile cleric who talks to the media is going to make a statement of doctrine that without ensuring that doctrine properly reflects the view of the top people. And so that will be the Pope's view. And that's out there, and I think that's quite an enlightened quote. And in one sense, it's logical. Who are we to say? I hate it when skeptics and debunkers say aliens wouldn't do that because, and it's like, how do you know? You know, you got a hotline to them or something. You know, aliens wouldn't come all the way to Earth and then abduct people. Why not? We don't know what's going on or why. You know, are we being experimented on, harvested? Are we part of a prison planet? Are we a reality TV show for aliens? You know, we don't know. We can only come at it from an anthropocentric viewpoint. And so if we can't say, you know, aliens wouldn't do that. We can't say that. We don't know what's in their minds. How could we have the arrogance to say what would be in the mind of a God? So that's I think a self-evident quote, but you know, people kind of expressing contrary opinions a while ago might have been burnt at the stake. So let's get, I guess, a little bit controversial now. There are, of course, when we talk about aliens and religion, religion is not a single thing. It's obviously a whole bunch of different things. There are a whole group of different religions. And then even before you split out the religions, whether it's Christianity, Islam, Judaism, whatever it may be, you can take any one of those single religions, and even within that single religion, you will find a vast spectrum of belief, from ultra-Orthodox, who literally believe every word in whatever their religious text is literally true, through to the more liberal wing that is prepared to say, well, you know what, some of these texts might be allegorical or metaphorical, and, it's not really a talking snake, it's the devil, or it's temptation, or whatever it is. But some people get very offended and say, no, it is what it says, and we shouldn't be reinterpreting it. So the position is complex. It's not like religion is a monolithic entity where you could then say, well, what is the relationship between religion and the extraterrestrial issue? Because, as I say, we have these whole different religions and the spectrum of belief within the religion, then people with their different personal degrees of faith. Some people absolutely doing the praying to Mecca 5 times a day or whatever, doing the attending church religiously, and other people just have a more personal faith, and they kind of, I believe in God, but I don't really do anything with it. And that, of course, takes you into the fact that many people say, well, there's a huge difference between God and religion. And many people who are deeply religious, get very offended by the way in which the organized religions have interpreted this. It's like they've put themselves between the creator and the individual. And so you have this people have a personal faith, but maybe don't go to church or worship in the conventional terms. And some people have a kind of more amorphous spirituality, and they kind of don't necessarily believe in a single creator God, but they think there's something. They don't necessarily know what it is or even put it into words, but I often hear people say, well, there's something. I don't know. Maybe the universe itself is self-aware, or maybe we're all connected, and that's a kind of spirituality. And in one sense, spirituality is not that different from religion, certainly in a personal view. It's I guess, the view that there's something else. It's not just us. There's maybe something bigger than us. And then there's a debate to be had and about what religion is. Is it a way by which we can know God? Or is it, as some people think, really a bit of a con and a way in which the elite have always sought to use religion as a means of social control? And, sometimes, a lot of what goes into things like most religious texts, when you get to the thou shalt not stuff, a lot of that's quite good stuff, isn't it? So there's a good side, even if you're an atheist, there's a good side to a lot of religion. It codifies a lot of stuff we should be abiding by anyway. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. It's all good stuff. So religion has, in human history, played quite an important role in codifying a lot of those good points about how we should live, things we should do, things we should not do. And it's the same with religious food taboos. That's actually quite a good example of where religion has done, you know, whether it's not eating raw, you know, uncooked pork or shellfish or whatever. There's a lot of stuff out there, particularly if you don't cook it properly, that can make you very, very sick and can kill you. And if some of that gets codified into religious texts, you know, slaughtering animals as opposed to eating a dead carcass. Well, if you come across a dead carcass, you don't know how long it's been there. It might have died of disease. You eat it and you get sick and you die. So the idea of religious strictures that talk about slaughtering animals and then eating them, you know that animal was healthy. So there's a reason why some of those food taboos exist, and some of it's a good stuff. But then, as I say, there is this feeling that often religion has been used as a way to keep the people in line in our places. The divine right of kings is a good example of that. It was an attempt to basically say kings rule by the will of God. And if you look at the British currency, it says, you know, God and my right in Latin, but it's like my right to rule comes from God. That is the modern, it's the kind of leftover of what used to be known in the UK as the divine right of kings. And the thinking was it makes people less likely to rebel or to try and kill the king or start a civil war. Now that's happened, but it hasn't happened often, and one of the reasons is that this view was created deliberately, that if you were rebelling against the king or the queen, you were rebelling against God. So religion has been used as a means of social control, and no one said it better than the film Minority Report. You seen that film with Tom Cruise? And they had this wonderful line, the power has always been with the priests, even if they had to invent the oracle. I mean, if you look at human history and the way that societies are set up, our modern system with a president and Congress and things, it's a very, very recent thing. For much of human history, we haven't had that sort of thing. We've basically had, you know, a leader, whether that leader's been called, you know, the chief of a tribe, whether it's the king or the queen or the empress or the emperor or whatever. Most times in human history, we've had a head person, and the other important person has always been the chief priest. Whether it's been, you know, literally a chief priest, or whether it's been the shaman, the person. But those people have always been the gatekeepers, as it were. And it's the idea that you put, again, some people are quite offended by this, that you put a gatekeeper between the ordinary people and the Creator, the God, the Great Spirit, whatever it is you believe in. And sometimes it's been done quite deliberately to keep people in line. Doesn't mean it's not true. Yes, please, feel free. Shout out, disagree, question.
I'm thinking, I saw all the charts, I described the region and all that, and I've seen a lot that's developed in the customs. And then I see this, and the first thing I think of was, so an alien race does show up, there's full disclosure, they're coming out, they want to come here and visit, they're going to bring their religion. How is our church, how's the Pope, how's our people, probably
I'm with apologies, I am going to get to that almost literally in the next couple of slides. Don't worry, I am absolutely going to be getting into that. I don't think it's the next one, but yeah, actually it is kind of. In 2010, there were two royal. You must be psychic. In 2010, there were two Royal Society discussion meetings held in the UK. The Royal Society is the oldest and arguably the most prestigious scientific body in the world. Its previous fellows and members have included Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking, and clearly they just celebrated their 300-year anniversary, and it's an extraordinary organization. And they were responsible, for example, for the first experimental verification of Einstein's theory of general relativity. They held these two discussion meetings back in 2010, and I was at both of them. And some information about them is out there on the internet. Not as much as I would have expected, actually, which is interesting. But you can Google the titles and probably find them. The first one was called The Detection of Extraterrestrial Life and the Consequences for Science and Society. And the second one was called, even cooler title, Towards a Societal Agenda on Extraterrestrial Life. If anyone ever tells you scientists don't take this sort of thing seriously, oh yes they do. Oh yes they do. There's a lot of thought going on about what happens when we find out that it's all true. Whether we're being visited or not isn't really the question. The question is, are we alone or not in the universe? And certainly there are a lot of scientists who say it's unlikely that we're alone, and given scientific advances, I mentioned things like the Square Kilometre Array and some other missions, we may find out sooner rather than later, even if there's a government cover-up. Even if. If they are out there, we will find them. And so at this first discussion meeting, the biggest row, and yes, they have rows at these scientific meetings, was about religion. And Ted Peters, he's a theologian. He has presented on this topic about how religions will incorporate an extraterrestrial reality into their doctrine. And Ted Peters, for example, very, very prominently cited Jose Gabriel Funes and his quote. And he said, this is a good example of why religions will be able to incorporate this into their world view. And he had done some polling, and he brought this data to the Royal Society, and it was interesting. It turned out that when he asked people across a whole range of religions, would this shatter your faith? Would this call your belief into question? Would it undermine the church, or whatever, of whatever denomination you are? And Ted Peters found that right across the spectrum of religion, this old cliche that it would shatter people's faith and cause the collapse of various churches and religions was not true. Wasn't true. And there were a couple of reasons for that. The first was basically people had a sense already of what Jose Gabriel Funes had said. It's not for us to say what a God could or couldn't, would or wouldn't do. But the other thing that Ted Peters found is he said, look, religious people said this. They said, if we find out there are other civilizations, other life, other civilizations out there, wouldn't that make the glory of God's creation even more expansive and wonderful than we even know now here on earth? I mean, we've got a wonderful range of life and beauty and amazing plants and animals here on earth and things, but if we find out there are billions and billions of worlds with all sorts of totally different things, wouldn't that make people think, wow, God did an even more wonderful thing in creating all of this? And so sometimes people say, if there's a cover-up, one of the reasons is that it would shatter the world's religions and there'd be chaos and panic and bloodshed, and people say there'd be panic in the street. All that turns out not to be true. And these Royal Society discussion meetings, what was great about them is it was a multidisciplinary gathering, not just astrophysicists and astronomers and chemists and biologists, but psychologists, anthropologists, theologians, saying what would be the societal implications of this to people's religiosity. Would there be panic in the streets? No. Turns out there wouldn't be. Why? Because if you look at the opinion polls, at least 50% of people already believe that there's life out there. Bigger than 50% believe the government isn't telling us everything they know about UFOs. And guess what? You don't panic people by telling them something they already believe. It's not rocket science, you know. But it's worth, I'm going to repeat that again, okay, because it's so true. You don't panic people by telling them something they already believe. So would there be panic in the streets? Maybe in the 30s, yes. But now, no way. And we even have a kind of test of this. We have, because it kind of happened. If you remember in 1996, NASA announced that they had discovered a meteorite which had come from Mars and which had what they believed to be fossilized microbes. Now, I'm not going to get into the science of that because they've kind of walked it back a little since then, and some other people in the scientific community say that there may be other explanations for why that meteorite has those structures in it. But NASA said in 1996, we have basically found evidence that at one time, don't know now, they're going to check that with one of these sample return missions, not OSIRIS-REx, but a Mars return mission. But NASA said there was life on Mars. And you probably remember, it made headline news all around the world. President Clinton made a nice speech about it. He said one of the biggest mysteries, one of the most profound questions that we can ask ourselves has today been answered. David Bowie's song Life on Mars got a lot of play on the radio. And guess what? Was there any panic in the streets? Life on Mars? No, there wasn't. Okay, and how things played out were, it was a great news story for a couple of days, and then the news cycle moved on, and everyone got back to the really important stuff, like what the Kardashians are doing. Did I say Kardashians or Cardassians? I'm getting my reality TV mixed up with my Star Trek. Yes.
So my question might be jumping ahead, and forgive me if it does. So there's this issue of what do we Earthlings in our religions think about aliens? But there's the other big question about what do the aliens think about religion? What do they bring to the table in terms of religion? And is that somewhere in your presentation?
I am absolutely going to get to that too. Yes. Yes, absolutely. So Ted Peters said, you know, yeah, Christians are fine with it, Muslims are fine with it, of course the Buddhists are fine with it. Then you're just like, yeah, hey, fine. That's really cool. The one thing he said, which I think struck a little note of warning, was, and I think this says more about religion than it says about God, but here we go. Ted Peters found that while everyone thought that their own religion would cope just fine, they thought that other people's silly religions, the people that have got it wrong, they'd suffer with it. So the Christians were like, we'd be fine with it, but I think the Jews and the Muslims they'd struggle. And the Muslims were like, we're fine with it. We've got our many worlds, but you know those crazy Christians. So what you had, it was almost like the circling of the wagons. The individual religions tried to talk the talk. Yeah, we'd be fine with it. These other people, they wouldn't. Paul Davies, sorry, go ahead.
You know, there's a spectrum within every religion. It's not like everyone's the same, as you said before.
Yes.
You can have original mystics with direct inner experience. You can have organized religion coming from that. And you can have extremists or dogmatists over here with literal interpretation.
Yes.
So did they have any evidence in that survey about, you know, because if you just say this religion totally supports ETs are fine, but about different perspectives within the religion on that question.
Ted Peters didn't get into that, and I haven't seen, and I don't know whether he's published the raw data. I don't, with apologies, I don't know the answer to that question. It's a very important point. My suspicion is that it's the ultra-Orthodox, the fundamentalists that would always struggle, because I think they would struggle with anything. They seem to get offended, whatever religion, by. I think it's always, exactly. I don't think so. Now, my apologies to Ted Peters if he's found otherwise. Maybe his raw data is out there, and some of his sample size, I think he polled more Christians than some of the other religions. So you can get into a whole debate about the statistical, is it statistically significant when you have a small sample size, as I think he did with some of the other religions. But my suspicion, my gut tells me that the liberal wing of any religion will be more open to extraterrestrials and the centrists maybe than the people at the extreme end. It's Paul Davies, and this is where we got into a row. Paul Davies, in a polite scientific way, and he's a physicist and he's written a lot of science books, so he's a science communicator. Paul Davies politely said to Ted Peters, I don't believe a word of what you're saying. I think the religions are talking the talk to try and make them sound as if they're open, but I don't think you would deal with it well at all. And I don't think, and I'm not here today to tell you how this will pan out, because my honest answer is I don't know. And I don't think Ted Peters really knows. I can tell you what I think will happen, and what I think will happen is what I said a moment ago. You don't shock people, you don't panic people by telling them something they already believe. But I think Paul Davies was right. I think some of the religions would struggle with this. And he felt that the savior religions in particular would have a huge problem, despite Jose Gabriel Funes saying that we can't place creative limits upon God. Paul Davies said, when this actually happens, all your fine words will come crashing down and people are going to have a huge problem, and it will fundamentally challenge. And I'm going to focus in this on specifically Christianity, because that's what happened at the Royal Society, and that's where the row between Ted Peters and Paul Davies took place. Paul Davies said that savior religions will have a big problem, and that if you look at certainly the Bible, it's like man created in the image of God, Jesus Christ, the only Son, sent to earth, and Peter says, this basically was a one-shot deal, that this isn't something that happens many times. Original sin, and the idea that Jesus Christ came to earth to redeem us and to save us from that original sin. And then in Revelations, the role that Jerusalem has, a city on planet Earth, not on another planet around another star. And so for these sorts of reasons, Paul Davies said, if this actually happens, the savior religions will have a huge problem, and there'll be some really hard questions. Maybe for those at the more fundamentalist, orthodox spectrum, but those people have a lot of power and influence. And, I put this up for a reason, because it kind of gets to the heart of it. This goes back to medieval times, when scholars and theologians debated endlessly points of trivia about the Bible. And Erasmus, the great thinker in Praise of Folly, he satirized this because theologians were literally asking these sorts of questions. And it got down to the level of fast that they were saying, if Christ wanted to, could he have come to earth in the form of a donkey or a gourd? And how would you have crucified a donkey? Would you have crucified a donkey? And again, it gets back to that idea. Are human beings able to place creative limits upon God? And if the answer to that, as most theologians say, is no, then if a God chooses to do something, who are we to say whether it would be ridiculous? But Paul Davies said, what are we to believe? The Bible says that Christ came here to redeem us from our sins, died, was resurrected, and that's redemption. Are we to then postulate that Christ was crucified and resurrected on every single planet that exists? I mean, Paul Davies, his fundamental point was, why just us? And that goes back to the point about savior religions, where the earth has a central special role. And Paul Davies says, it looks as if we probably don't. We're not so special. And that being the case, where's God in all of this? Yes?
Don't you think our reaction would depend upon what the aliens look like? If they come out of their ship looking like an angel versus looking like Satan, wouldn't there be a huge difference?
I think so. I think you're absolutely right. Now, let's imagine for a moment that that's exactly what happens. Let's consider the archetypal landing on the White House lawn with your question in mind. If the spaceship lands and the door opens and the ramp comes down and some, tall, slim, blonde, angelic-featured creature comes out, we might say, wow, the angels have returned, and we'll get into things like that a little later. But just imagine, I feel sorry for the poor alien that comes down and they've got the horns and the tail, and it's just, hey guys, welcome. And we're going, no, it's the devil. And it's just, and how many people watch Doctor Who? There's a classic episode, and I think it was one of the old John Pertwee episodes, and I think it was called The Claws of Axos. And they kind of satirized that very point, where they had two races of extraterrestrials, and there were some beautiful-looking ones and some horrible monsters. And it turned out the beautiful-looking ones were the bad guys. So never judge a book by its cover. That's why I say I feel sorry if there are extraterrestrials out there and they're high-minded, moralistic, good, and they're scientists, explorers, anthropologists. They come to Earth, but they happen to look like the devil. I feel sorry for them because I think, yeah, absolutely. So I'm just, this kind of gets actually to another thing which just got into the media recently. When the story about the Pentagon's UFO program broke, one of the interesting throwaway lines that Luis Elizondo came up with is he said he hit some roadblocks with senior managers in the Pentagon. And one of the roadblocks that he hit was that some people, the idea that we might be visited by extraterrestrials did cause them a problem. It was either against their religious worldview or they thought it was demonic. And this goes back again to Paul Davies doubting what Ted Peters said. And, this seemed to be an example of where Luis Elizondo said that he had taken this issue as far as he could within government, and one of the roadblocks he hit was that people just, I don't want to deal with that. And this is a phrase that I came up across. In my Ministry of Defense work, occasionally you would hit a roadblock, and it would be the religious thing, and wherein in time past ye walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. The prince of the power of the air is Satan, Lucifer, the devil. And the fact that Satan was described as the prince of the power of the air is one of the things that has caused some people of religious faith, ever since the UFO mystery first exploded into public awareness in 1947 with flying saucers and Roswell. From that time onwards, some people took the view that UFOs were, it's the work of the devil, and that aliens are in fact demons. Yes?
If anyone else is Mormon in this room, help me with this, but in our faith, we believe that, Christ was saved for us. And we know that there are many worlds out there, but we feel that he was crucified here because we were the most disobedient. And that other planets, he is still the Savior for them. And in the scriptures it mentions the watchers. And the watchers are supposedly good. They watch us. So in the Mormon faith, we're not afraid of UFOs like this.
Right.
Is power of the air. But that the watchers are here to watch and to make sure things go as planned. But this all kind of fits with our religion.
It raises, I think what you said raises an interesting point. Let's suppose that, I don't know, I'm just plucking a number out of the air, 1 million other civilizations out there. Paul Davies' point, taking your question in mind, would be, well, does that mean that when you have a civilization where the people are good, Jesus doesn't visit them because he doesn't need to, but when you get a planet that steps out of line and is disobedient and sins, Jesus comes down and on that planet he gets crucified and resurrected. So you have a scenario where maybe, I don't know, let's just suppose that there are, half a million good civilizations and 500,000 bad civilizations. And this sounds irreverent, but it kind of gets to the heart of what Paul Davies was saying. Does that mean that 500,000 planets get a Jesus to get them back on track, and 500,000 planets don't? So 500,000 planets have had Jesus and the crucifixion and the resurrection. And Paul Davies said, don't you see how farcical that sounds? Half a million crucifixions on these planets and no crucifixions on that planet, and Jesus comes to save half of them and not the other half, and so I totally get what you're saying. I'm just giving you the why Paul Davies said that he thought that it might not quite pan out the way all the religions think it would. But
our prophet does say that there is a time that they will come here. We will see them. We will work with them. So this all fits. That's the
okay.
reason I came, because I
Right.
knew that it fit.
Right. And yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of people, and we're totally going to get into this as well, a lot of people absolutely, and particularly the people here at Contact in the Desert, absolutely get this. And you are, I suspect, all people, just by virtue of your presence here, who will, whatever religion you have, or even if you don't have a religion, the fact that you're sitting here in this room, the fact that you've come to this conference, is I think, proof enough that you are people sufficiently emotionally and spiritually ready and mature to take it. But I think there will be people who struggle. And Paul Davies said the same. I just put this in as a joke. This is when I wanted this read at my funeral. It's just like it's a slightly irreverent thing, but it is actually in the Bible. Go up, thou bald head. Go up, thou bald head. And the kids mock the prophet, and then get ripped to pieces by a bear that comes out of the forest. And this is I put that up for a reason. Firstly, just a little bit of light relief, but secondly, it goes back to that point about within each individual religion, there's a spectrum of belief. And the people at the liberal end of the spectrum, I think generally speaking, are able to interpret things, and be more mature about things. The fundamentalist people of whatever religion who believe literally every word of the Bible is true, I think would struggle. And I say to those people sometimes, you do know that's in the Bible. I say, what's that all about? Some kids called this guy Baldy, and he called on the name of the Lord, and a bear came out of the forest and mauled them all to death. I said, you do know that's in the Bible. And I've had some religious people say, no, it's not. And I've given them the reference, and I said, look it up, it's right there. And it's like, well, I mean, it's probably metaphorical. It just must have slipped in somehow. But it's like, no, you told me this was the word of God, literally. So, as well as the Royal Society discussion meeting, there was a conference put on preparing for discovery in 2014 in Washington, D.C., and one of the subjects there was, would you baptize an extraterrestrial? What was interesting about this conference was that it was put on jointly by NASA and the Library of Congress. So again, don't think that the powers that be aren't thinking about some of this. Here's now we're getting to the meat of it. This gets to a question that I think came up. This is the fun stuff. When we make contact with other civilizations, will they tell us something about God? Will they know something about God? Will we find out something about religion? And here, I've just put down some possible scenarios. One possible scenario is that when a civilization gets sufficiently powerful and, discovers everything, that if there's a God out there, that civilization will discover that God and maybe communicate quite openly with that God. That raises, of course, the difficult theological question of, why do those civilizations, why should some civilizations get to talk directly and openly to the Creator, but not others? Now, some people say, but we talk to God all the time, and it's called prayer. And then you get that joke that sometimes people say, yeah, I talk to God, and that's not a problem, but if I tell anyone that God talks back to me, they lock me up. And of course, we've seen all too often people who do crazy things because they think God is talking to them and telling them to do something. And, in one sense, it's unknowable whether that's true, but I suspect that when someone goes and shoots up a whole bunch of people and said that they heard the voice of God, that they're not hearing anything and that they're just mentally ill. But that's one possible scenario. What if we find that aliens have a crazy-sounding God and religion? What do we do then? And turn it around. What if aliens think that our idea of God and our religion is just absolutely crazy and does not accord with anything that they know or believe about God. And what happens, we talk about the spectrum of religiosity. What happens if those civilizations, more powerful than us, are crusaders or evangelists? They want to convert us to their religion. And they have a bizarre, crazy-sounding God and bizarre religious rituals that would make no sense to us. But they are so fervent in their belief that this is the thing that you must do. And if we don't, if not, we're going to wipe you out as heathens or forcibly convert. We've seen all too often in human history when religions, when missionaries go out, what they try and do, instead of respecting the beliefs of other peoples that they come across, there seems to be this desire that we must bring you closer to our God because you've got it wrong, we're right, we know what God is, and you must do the same as us. And so what if we find when we meet aliens that they want to convert us to their crazy religion, and they kill us, or they kill us if we don't, or they convert us and we have to do all sorts of weird stuff because that civilization is really, really powerful and that religion has spread throughout the cosmos. Yes?
Are we to assume that ETs have all the answers? They know everything. Maybe they're just like us and they don't know.
Yeah, I think that kind of speaks to the final one, and I'll get there in one moment. One troubling thing, and this was the view of Paul Davies and many of the scientists, is that his view was that any truly advanced civilization will have grown out of religion. They will regard religion and the idea of God as primitive superstition that societies believe in when they first kind of emerge and they hear thunder in the skies and they think there's an angry God. But as you get more advanced, you find out, oh no, you know what? That's just a storm. And so many people think in the scientific community that we will grow out of religion and that it's just stuff for the kids, like Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy, and that truly advanced civilizations will smile and laugh and say, yeah, I remember that, but we've moved on. And that's another scenario. But just to speak to your question before I get to you, as above, so below. Yeah, I'm sure you're right. What we'll probably find is a whole bunch of different things. We'll find some extraterrestrials some civilizations have no religion. Other civilizations have a religion, and it might be quite similar to our idea. And some civilizations will probably have a crazy-sounding religion. So I think, again, it comes back to the thing that we're not just going to find that there's one other civilization out there. We'll probably find a crowded cosmos and a whole range of different beliefs, and on some occasions, no beliefs. Yes?
Two things. Did you ever watch Babylon 5? I don't know, it's a science fiction series, but they had one episode dealing with Earth beings interacting with the religions of Earth with other civilizations. And in that one, they had each different civilization had a particular religion. But then when they portrayed the Earth ones, they were a whole range of different religions, which is just their way of trying to deal with it. But my other question is, was Davies' view, that advanced civilizations were outgrow religion, but what about spirituality? Because I thought Davies was actually pretty spiritual as a scientist.
Yeah, he did not address that specifically. I suspect that, again, I think it goes back to what I said, that when I talk to people about this, a lot of people say, I don't believe in God, but there's something. And it's almost like they can't even articulate it. And I think that is a form of spirituality. Now, some people would say spirituality is a kind of form of cheating. It's like you do believe, but you kind of almost don't want to or don't articulate it as such. But you kind of are religious. It's just that you call it something else. And I don't know. I think that goes I can't answer that. I don't think anyone can. It goes down, only the individual can say what they truly know and feel and believe, and I think you have to respect that spectrum. To answer the first point, I have not seen that. That's one sci-fi series that I never really watched. I will binge watch it, I'm sure, at some stage, and I'll look out for that episode. It sounds quite thoughtful.
A lot of young people today, I think, who would call themselves spiritual but not religious. And you can poo-poo people like that as not being religious enough, but it's also been pointed out that if we deal with where we are. So maybe if there's more young people who are spiritual but not religious, they'll be more able to accept.
I think so, and I think we see a lot of that this weekend. Again, a lot of the people here at this event, I think, have exactly that mindset. There was a question back. Yes.
The one question I have about this whole thing, was there any discussion of the fact that when they were talking about this, did they realize they were making the assumption that aliens weren't already here? We had beer last night with Linda Moulton Howe, and she said that prior to World War II, Hitler was saying that he would put Aryans in the governments of all the world once he conquered the world. And she said that his attempt to kill the Jews was an attempt of the Aryans to get rid of the hybrid reptilian aliens that was supposed to be the Jewish race.
Right.
Are they here already?
Well, I don't buy into those sorts of scenarios, with greatest respect to Linda, but I think she and I would disagree about that. I mean,
These were in speeches by Hitler
well,
prior to the war.
yeah, I would want to see those original speeches in the original German and see. I'm a little skeptical. But to go to your specific point about that, no, that premise that we are already being visited and they are already among us was not discussed at that Royal Society meeting, nor is it the belief of almost every one of the scientists who were having this discussion. They were very careful to say we are talking about scenarios where we discover extraterrestrial life, be it microbes on Mars or picking up a signal from another civilization. They were very careful to say we are not saying that we are being visited and that they're already here. Even within the scientific community, there is a spectrum of belief. And when you have the Royal Society putting on those conferences, there are other scientists who roll their eyes and say, I don't think the Royal Society should be looking at this sort of nonsense, because they don't believe it. So there's always going to be that spectrum of belief, even in the scientific community, where we tend to think there are absolutes, but there aren't. There are a whole bunch of scientists who think there's life out there. There are a whole bunch of scientists who don't. There are some scientists who are religious. Actually, not that many, but some. And yes, sorry. Go.
As for aliens and religion, I know for us, we believe that God is our Father, literally our Father in heaven. So if He's a father, there must be a mother there too. So there are families, and I can see that He must have had a father too. He must have had grandfathers. There may be lots, just like there is on Earth, so many different peoples. Maybe there were different peoples there. So let's say our God had a cousin who intermarried with some other weird kind of person, that there would be a God that would be similar to what some of the aliens look like. So if it's in families, I can just see it goes eternally.
Sure. I mean, I think we don't have time to get into a wider discussion about this, but I think there's certainly an argument that religion, or organized religion, has often in human history been used as a tool to reinforce a patriarchal society. It's very, very male, usually. which is why when you come to an event like this and people talk about the goddess and the divine feminine, that it's maybe a kickback against that. But yeah, again, as above, so below. I'm not going to spend much time on that, but that's basically the Kardashev scale, a theoretical scale of how advanced a civilization is. But I'm not going to get into huge amounts there, but it really leads into, I mean, this is a scale of how advanced a civilization is, and Michio Kaku has recently said, we, the human race, is not yet even a type 1 civilization. We're maybe 200 or 300 years off that. But if we're heading down that road, and if we're talking about truly advanced societies, we get to that. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, the famous quote from Arthur C. Clarke. And if you are dealing with civilizations so advanced that they can harness the entire power of a star, or if they're hostile, snuff out a star in an instant with some super weapon, or they can create life either in a test tube or create artificial intelligence, then this quote takes us to this quote from me. And it's why I'm kind of more, I think, personally siding with Paul Davies than with Ted Peters on this, because I think it raises theological implications that we will find difficult. What if, it's a hypothetical, I'll throw it out there. What if we create life ourselves? Does that give anyone who's religious a problem? I don't know. Because if God is supposed to be the creator with a capital C, what if we become creators and create new life? And some people say that we're very close to doing that in some of our artificial intelligence. And you know, the idea, I think it raises much wider questions about the nature of consciousness. But certainly, if computer processing power by 2045 is going to be 100,000 times more powerful than a human brain, at what point might a machine ever become self-aware? And how would we know if it had? It reminds me, as the title of this presentation is Aliens and Religion, it reminds me of the old science fiction short story where they construct the world's most sophisticated and powerful computer, and they plug it in, and the first question they ask is there a God? And the computer says, there is now. So it raises questions that I think religions will struggle with if the human race creates artificial intelligence, and then that life itself evolves and we become creators. So I think that is an interesting thing, and I'm not sure we aren't that far off from it. I'm not. And Elon Musk certainly, who's a pretty smart person, thinks there's a danger here, and he's not alone. Could I get another water from someone? But I think that the organized religions and many of the people individually, thank you, would struggle at the point when human beings create life either in a test tube or in a computer program. And here's the point about artificial intelligence. You create AI, and supposing it becomes self-aware, and then the point about that AI is that it's programmed firstly, it goes beyond its own programming, which is kind of the point, and then it itself creates new life. So you have us creating new life, and then you have that new life itself creating another new life, and on it goes. Now, some people will deal with that from a religious or spiritual point of view by saying, well, even if we create life, and if we were created ourselves by extraterrestrials, somewhere, if you follow it far enough upstream, you get to an original creator God. And that maybe will be the only way that they can kind of deal with that when it starts happening, or if we encounter extraterrestrials who say, we made you. And you know where I'm going with this, of course. I'm going to ancient aliens. Whoever said that doing TV work is all glamour and excitement, it really isn't. This is me freezing my backside off halfway up a mountain in Wales for an episode we shot last year. Do I look happy? But again, self-evidently, what this discussion is leading to is ancient astronaut theory, and how we then incorporate that into religion. What if aliens land on the White House lawn, not just sneak around and occasionally get photoed, but what if we have that? Okay, it's all true, it's real, we're here, and by the way, we made you. You are our little science experiment. Are they our gods? Many people, when you read some of the books on all this, it's chariots of the gods. Are our gods actually just extraterrestrials who've made us, maybe in their image or maybe in a hybridized image? And, if that turns out to be true, how does religion, specifically organized religion, deal with it? And I suspect they would struggle, because they would be saying, no, the Bible says, for example, that God created us in His image. And so if we have a civilization that says, no, we created you, and by the way, you're not that special, we've created a whole bunch of other planets with life like you, and a whole bunch of other planets with different life, and they're going to show us to prove it's true. How does religion deal with that? Do they say, as I suspect they would say, that they're demons, they're deceivers, they're false gods, that it's all a con? Or does religion just have to kind of hang up its hat and say, oh, well, we were wrong? Well, how many people do you know in religion, particularly at the extreme end of the spectrum, who say, okay, we were wrong, I'll move on, there's nothing to see? Can you see that happening? Because I can't. Yes.
That kind of touches on what Eric Von Daniken talked about yesterday with his three
They have to ask him for the mic or it won't show up.
Okay.
Thank you. Eric Von Daniken touched on that yesterday with the children of Fatima, and how these children in 1917 witnessed apparitions of the Virgin Mother. And after her apparition, she gave instructions to one of the children to give to their leader 43 years later. And in their view, their leader was the Pope. So the Pope could not open this instruction until 1960. I don't remember the Pope at the time, but when he read the instruction, he was supposed to reveal it to the world. He couldn't reveal it because he felt it would really threaten the faith of the church. So it's kind of touching on what you're saying. Could what he read threaten the faith of either the Catholicism or other faiths? He just could never reveal it. The weird thing is, I don't ever know what the secret is. I know the Vatican is becoming more open with it, but it kind of aligns with what you're talking about.
Thank you for that. Yes, I've certainly heard the story of the third secret of Fatima, and the idea that it might be something revelatory and something actually deeply disturbing, because if it wasn't, why not release it? I don't know, of course, whether those children really experienced that or whether they were making it up for attention. I mean, I don't know that any of us can really be sure what happened to those children. And even if they believe it to be true, I don't know whether it is literally true. I mean, lots of people see things and hear voices. It doesn't necessarily mean it's aliens or gods. It could be delusion or hallucination or mental illness. But I think absolutely that does go to the heart of why religions, I suspect, would struggle with this, even when they say that they won't. And the scenario of extraterrestrials just saying, you are really nothing more than a science experiment, or actually, as some people say, this is getting heavy and far out, but reality itself is an illusion. We're in the Matrix. Yes, we are sentient, but we are not biological entities. This is all just a computer program in an advanced simulation created by an extraterrestrial civilization. And you know, maybe when we get close to finding that out, the reality will begin to start to break down and get fuzzy at the edges, and weird things will happen. So there are a whole bunch of scenarios that might happen. Yes, at the back there, and please wait for the microphone. I think we've got about 10 minutes, by the way.
Yes, and very briefly. In my mind, if an alien popped out on the White House lawn and said, guess what, we created you, at least two really, really good follow-up questions would be, number one, can you prove that? In other words, why do we take them at their word? They could be lying for their own purposes. And number two, who created them? You know, and those are at least interesting questions to pursue in that kind of scenario.
Yes, I absolutely agree. On the first question, as ever, trust but verify. I think if extraterrestrials told us that, we would want proof. And it might actually be quite difficult. If we're dealing with a civilization that's really advanced, it might be very difficult for us to obtain proof if it was their intention to deceive us. I mean, a skilled magician can fool us now. Imagine what an advanced civilization would be able to do. Back to that Arthur C. Clarke quote. So it might even turn out to be not just difficult, but impossible to verify their claims of being our creator. As for your second point, absolutely, who created them. And that's why religion's get out with all this is, yes, but originally they were created by God with a capital G. I think that might almost be, you know what, yes, it is. So now we are going to just completely take any remaining questions for the last 10 minutes. Yes, right here at the front. Oh, sorry, again, please wait for the microphone.
It's not so much a question as a thought that is occurring to me while I'm listening. When we're talking about the beginning of the universe, there are so many that believe that it started with a big bang, and my question has always been, how can you get something from nothing? And so when you're talking about gods or a creator God, it's like, how can you go back to just one entity? There must have been something before that. How can you get one from nothing?
I think I'd have to be a quantum physicist to even attempt to answer that. I know that in the world of quantum physics, there is the theory that something can spontaneously arise, and that the universe itself arose spontaneously from literally nothing, and that because space and time are actually interwoven, and Einstein called it space-time, that the phrase "what came before the Big Bang" is meaningless because time itself only came into existence at the Big Bang. But if any scientist says that they can explain it to you, they can't. I mean, cosmologists and theoretical physicists can't agree. There are many, many different theories about how the universe actually developed. And we don't even have a grand unified theory that marries up physics at the macro level with physics at the quantum level. And if we don't even have that, all predictions about how the universe arose effectively break down in the first instance after the Big Bang. So in one sense, it may be unknowable. And some of the latest theories suggest, of course, that our universe is one of many, that there is what's been called a multiverse. And as well as the multiverse, there may be an infinite amount of parallel universes, parallel worlds, which again, bringing it back to religion, raises some troubling theological notions. An infinite number of worlds that had a Jesus, and an infinite number of worlds that didn't. Because maybe we didn't need saving from original sin or
And a lot of good that did us anyways.
Yeah.
We don't appear to be all that saved.
No, indeed. So there are all sorts where we get into this kind of how did it all begin. It's, some people say, well, they try and incorporate the two by I talked about trying to marry up science and religion. Some people take the view that the world was created 6,000 years ago, in a very literal sense. Some people say, no, I accept that the Big Bang and evolution are real things, but I believe that God created the universe in which these things came to pass. And then you get awkward philosophical questions like, well, where did God come from? And people say, well, no, God always was. And you get that awkward area where science, religion, and philosophy intersect. How many people have seen